So I want to talk a little bit about irrational behavior. And I became interested in irrational behavior when I was in hospital. Many years ago, I was badly burned in an explosion, and I was burned in 70% of my body, and I spent about 3 years in hospital. And hospitals are a place where you could observe lots and lots of irrational behaviors. But for me, the most central one was the question of how to remove bandages from burn patients. So imagine that you had most of your body covered with burns, and the nurses had to take off the bandages. And now the question is, what is the right way to do it? You could rip the bandages off quickly, one after the other, try to minimize the time, but every second is going to be very painful. Or you could do it very slowly. You could take your time, stretch the time, and every second will be much less painful. So think to yourself, what would you prefer? If you were the patient, how many of you would prefer the quick ripping approach? Raise your hand. How many would prefer the slow approach? Okay, so the vast majority of the people think, let's go with the quick ripping approach. That's what my nurses thought as well. In retrospect, I think this is because how they used to wax their legs. But in any case, they would rip the bandages off quickly, and as a patient, I would try to argue with them, and I would say, let's take some time and don't do it as fast, and give me some time to break. And the nurses said two things. The first thing they said was that they were correct, that they knew what the right answer was. The second thing, they reminded me that the word patient doesn't mean to butt in or intervene or make suggestions. This was in Israel, so it was in Hebrew, but it turns out that the word patient and its connection with passivity is applicable worldwide. I kept on arguing with them. They kept on doing what they thought was best. And when I left the hospital and I joined the university, I learned about the experimental method. I learned that sometimes you can take a problem, you can represent it in the lab, you could try different versions, and you could see what's the correct response. So initially, I didn't have much money for research, so I went to a hardware store and I bought a carpenter's vise, and I set it in the lab, and I invited people to come in and put 2 fingers in this vise. And I would slightly crunch their fingers for short duration and long duration, for high intensity, low intensity, pain that went up, pain that went down, all kinds of versions of pain. And after each of those, I would ask people, how painful was this? And how painful was that? And if you had to choose one of the last 2, which one would you choose to repeat again? People gave me their answers, and I tried to understand what controls the interpretation of an experience that evolved over time, and how do we summarize it? How do we create the overall evaluation? I published my first academic paper on this. This was good news. I got more money. I moved to better equipment. Noises, electrical shocks. I even designed a suit. This was a suit with 300 feet of hoses that I could get people to be very cold and very hot, and I could make them miserable in both ways. And across all of those experiments, I learned that the nurses were wrong in 3 ways. First of all, it turns out that if you take an experience and you make it twice as long, you don't make it twice as bad. You take the amplitude and you make it worse. Now you've really made it worse. So the nurses were focusing on trying to make the duration shorter. They shouldn't have cared as much as duration. They shouldn't have sacrificed on the intensity. So they got things wrong there. The second thing, it turns out that pain that starts low and increases over time, it's perceived as much worse than pain that starts high and go down over time. And mostly for reason of convenience, the nurses started at my legs and ended up at my head, giving me the wrong progression of pain over time. And finally, it turns out that for long periods of pain, it's really good to give people a break, kind of to brace themselves, prepare themselves for the next period, get some energy, and then deal with this. And the nurses kind of missed all of those things. And the question is why? And remember, it's not as if the nurses said, we don't know. No, they had tremendous conviction. They were following their beliefs in a strong way. Nevertheless, they were doing things wrong, and not just for me, for every other patient. And the question, of course, was, are the nurses the only people in the world that have wrong intuition? Are the nurses the only people in the world that have intuition that leads them one way, but in fact, reality points in another way? So from that point on, I became interested in all kinds of ways in which our intuition tells us one thing and reality is different. So I want to show you a couple of those in visual illusions. So if you look at those 2 tables, and I put some lines on these tables, and I can ask you which one of those 2 dimensions is longer. Is the horizontal dimension on the table on the right, or the vertical dimension on the table on the left? And if you're like everybody else in the world, you probably think the one on the left is larger, but in fact it's not. If you look at this animation, it would prove to you that those two, oops, it moved a little bit. But trust me, they are the same. You're welcome to take the slides later and try it out. Here's another visual illusion. From these two towers of Pisa, which one looks like it's leaning more to the right? Hopefully the one on the right. How about now? Hopefully the same thing. If you look at this patch, what is the top arrow pointing to? To what kind of color? Brown. The bottom? Orange. Turns out they're identical. If I cover the background up, you can see that those two are actually identical. And there's no trick. You're welcome to the slides, and you can do some arts and crafts and show it to yourself. And if I take the background away, the illusion pops right back. I want to show you one other illusion. You know, we're at Google, and Google has an auction mechanism behind it. So I want to talk a little bit about auctions. I'm going to do an auction here for $100. This is a real $100 bill. Seth from Intuit will verify this. That's right. That's right. So I'm going to do an auction for a $100 bill. It's for real. The winner will win the $100 bill and pay me whatever they bid. Here are the rules for the auction. First of all, you can't talk. It's a silent auction. The second thing is that the bid will start at $5 and would increase by $5 at a time. It will be 5, 10, 15, and so on. The third rule is that the highest bidder will pay me whatever they bid and get this $100. The last rule is that the second highest bidder would also pay me what they bid, but they will get nothing. Are the rules clear? Are the rules clear? Okay. If anybody is interested, just raise your hand. $5, $5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 50, 55, 60, 65. Okay, 65 and 60, right? Oh, 70, 65 and 70. Anybody else? Okay, let's stop for 75. Okay, so let's stop. Okay, 80. So we have 75. The gentleman with 75, would you stand up for a second? And the gentleman with 80, would you stand up as well? Okay, so first of all, let's think about what happened now. We have 75 and 80. If we stop now, the gentleman who said 80 gives me 80 and get the 100. That's a good deal. The other gentleman gives me 75 and gets nothing. Right? That's the rules. The first thing is I'm ahead, just so we're clear about where we're going. Now, here's the thing. The guy with the 75, you can stop at 75 or you can go to 85. What do you want to do? 85. Do you want to go to 90? Yes, 90. Do you want to go to 95? Yes. Do you want to go up to 100? Yes. Do you want to go to 105? Yes. You want to go up to 110? You want to go to 115? Okay, we'll continue later. I just want to prove the principle. This is a particular version of an auction called an all-in auction. And if any of you, how many of you at some point wanted to raise your hand and bid, like when it was $5? How many of you kind of had an itch to do it? Right? This is a mistake. It means you didn't understand the rules of the game. It means you thought about one step ahead, because one step ahead it looks like a good deal, but eventually this will become a really bad deal, and we could have gone on for a while on this thing. Now, I want you to think about visual illusions and also about this little auction game as something very basic to human decision making. We have this particular way in which we process information that is not always accurate, not always rational, not always good for us. And I want to show you a couple of examples for this in decision making. So this is my favorite plot in social science. It's a plot that shows the percentage of people in different countries in Europe who are interested in giving their organs to donation. And you see countries on the right that give a lot and countries on the left that give very little. And when I ask my students why, I say, why do you think some countries give a lot and some countries give a little? The usual answer is that because of how much people care about other people in the society. You know, when you give somebody a regular gift, you get to look in their eyes, you get to see the sense of appreciation, reciprocity. Organ donations, not so much. So why would people give? Presumably how much you care about your society. But if you look carefully at this plot, you would see that Sweden, for example, gives 86%. Denmark, very similar, gives 4%. Germany gives 12%. Austria gives almost 100%. And one of the most interesting comparisons between the Netherlands and Belgium. Similar countries, Belgium gives a lot, Netherlands doesn't give as much. And the Netherlands got to 28% after a huge marketing campaign. They sent everybody in the country a letter begging them to join the organ donation program. They had television, radio. They actually had a reality TV show on that as well. With all of these efforts, they got to 28%. So you could say, so what did Belgium do? And how did Belgium get to 98%? The reality is that all of this difference comes from the way the enrollment form is phrased. It's not about religion. It's not about belief. It's about the way the enrollment form is being phrased. And here's the secret. Some countries have a form that looks like this. Check the box if you want to participate in the organ donation program. And what do people do when they see this form? They do nothing. They don't check, and they don't join. These are the countries on the left. The countries on the right has a slightly different form. It says, check the box if you don't want to participate in the organ donation program. And what do people do when they see this form? The same thing. They do nothing, but now they join. And of course, we call this opt-in and opt-out, and this is the idea of default and the path of least resistance. And you know, we all understand that defaults are important for small decisions, but it turns out that defaults are also important for big decisions. Because as decisions become bigger and more complex and more difficult and more important, what happens? We don't know what to do. And when we don't know what to do, we do what? We let the people who design the interface in which we make decisions, what we call choice architecture, decide for us. So the environment in which we make decisions has a huge effect. I want to tell you one other story about defaults. There's a big PBM. PBM is a company that sells people medication online. If you got any kind of long-term disease, you might get your medication every 90 days. And this particular PBM had the following problem. People got branded medications, and they wanted to switch people to generic medications. So what did they do? They sent people a letter, and they said, please, please, please move to generic medications. You would save money, we would save money, your employer would save money. And what do people do when they get this letter? Absolutely nothing. So for 1 year, they tried to give people zero copay. You didn't have to pay anything for this medication. What happens now? Almost nothing. So they came to a group of us and they said, look, people just seem to hate generic medications. We send them letters, we send them postcards, we give them discounts. Nothing seems to be happening. And we said, that's possible, but it's also possible that people hate doing anything. Right? If you think about it, their design was that people were going on around their business, and they said, please do something different, please do something different. The fact that people did not do something different, is it because people did not want the particular offer or wouldn't do anything? So we came up with an idea. We said, what if there was a T intersection? When they mail people a letter and they say, listen, buddy, there's no way to do nothing here. You have to return this letter, otherwise your medication stops. And now you can choose. You want branded at this price or you want generic at this price. What happened? Almost 90% of the people moved to generics. So what's going on here? Do people like generics or do they like branded? Turns out that's not really an interesting question. The important question is that people hate returning letters. That's a much, much bigger effect. I want to say have one more point, which is all of these effects of the decision environment basically come to the realization because we really don't know our preferences very well. If you knew that you always want to donate your organs or you always want to maximize your 401k or whatever it is, none of this would matter. But the reality is that we don't know our preferences as well as we think we do. So I just want to give you one demonstration of this. Imagine I asked the people sitting on my right to write down 3 reasons why you love your significant other. And I asked the people sitting on my left to write down 10 reasons why you love your significant other. And after I gave you some time to this, I would ask you, and how much do you love your significant other? On a 10-point scale, what would you get them for their birthday or anniversary? How long do you think you'll stay together, and so on? You think it would matter whether I asked you to think about 3 reasons or 10? It shouldn't, because I didn't tell you anything new, but it does matter. So who do you think declared greater love for their significant other? How many people think that after you thought about 3 reasons, you would declare greater love? A few. How many people think 10? Okay. And there could be reasons here and there, right? With 3, you could say you focus on the essential. With 10, you could say you think more broadly. The reality is that it's very, very, very hard to come up with 10 reasons. Those of you who've been married longer know what it means. And it's not only that it's difficult for people to think about 10 reasons. As people struggle with reasons 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, they say to themselves, how much possibly can I love this person? The same thing works for BMWs. It turns out there are no 10 reasons to buy BMWs. I also use this trick in teaching. The last day of the semester, we asked the students to do class evaluations, and the dean liked to see high teaching ratings. So just before the students submit their evaluations, I asked them to think about 15 ways in which this class could be improved. You know, presumably 15 are too many. They run out. I get good grading. I want to end with one final thought, which is, you know, I started telling you a little bit about the nurses in hospital and how the nurses were wrong. After I finished much of this research, I went back to hospital, and I gave a lecture to my nurses and doctors. I've given lots of talks in hospital since. And my favorite nurse, Etty, came to me after the lecture, and she said that I did not think about her pain. She said, what about her pain? She was removing my bandages. This was no picnic for her either. And of course, we agreed that this was no picnic for her either, but we also agreed that the goal of medical treatment is not to minimize the nurse's pain. And then I asked her, why didn't you just try it my way a little bit? And the way she described it was that every day she was standing in a junction. She could do what she thought was good for me, which was the quick ripping approach, and what she thought was good for her. Or she could try something different that she didn't try before, that she thought was not good for me and she thought was not good for her. And this lack of willingness to try something different, it's what really caused that bad decision to repeat itself over and over and over. And for me, this is actually the most important lesson from behavioral economics and I think much of social science. In life, we act a lot based on our intuitions. We have an idea of how the world works. But the reality is, if we took a step back and we say, under what conditions is this really just intuition, or do we really know what we're doing for sure? And if we had a little bit more humility, a little bit certainty in what we're doing, maybe we would follow our intuition a little less, try more different things, experiment, and hopefully get to better results. And thank you very much.